Good afternoon, and welcome once again to our studio, NCG studio here in Texas. It's a rainy day here in our part of Texas. We're enjoying a nice little shower outside, always welcome. I'd like to start off today, though, reminding you the name of our show is What Would Love Do? And I was thinking about that just a little earlier, and I'd like to call to our attention that the title is actually a question, what would love do? And I guess I want to state this kind of as a disclaimer. We're not here saying that we know what love would do in every case and in every situation, but it's our quest, it's our desire, our goal is to discover that. And so I think it's very important that we have a good understanding of that, because I certainly wouldn't want anyone to think that I'm qualified in every case to say exactly what love would do in any given situation. Far from it. But it certainly is a goal. And in my estimation, it's one of the best goals a person could have. And so hopefully, anyone listening today, that's at least part of the reason that you're listening, because we're on this search together. You know, it's certainly not a one-man thing. As a matter of fact, I look at it as a humanity thing. It involves all of us. And so before we get done, we want to include everyone on planet Earth, if that be possible. But I'd like to begin by relating an incident that just took place in my life, and I think it's relevant to what I want us to talk about today. Woke up this morning, and my wife was experiencing some difficulties, some physical difficulties, and there's no need to go into detail. And as it turns out, it's nothing major, nothing that can't be taken care of fairly simply, so we're very thankful for that. But I was faced with a situation of what do we do? Good time to ask the question, what would love do? Do I say, okay, well, let's wait a couple of days, or maybe tomorrow you can make an appointment and see what the problem is if things don't get worse between now and then, or just go ahead and do something that is right there available for us to do. And that's what we did. I took her to the emergency room. And so hopefully, that was a loving thing to do. But that's not really where I wanted to go with this, because as we were sitting there in the emergency room, the doctor came in and he diagnosed the problem rather quickly, very professionally. I was very impressed, once again, very thankful. And he prescribed a shot. The nurse came in, gave my wife a shot. Shortly after that, they waited to make sure there was no reaction, and then a prescription was given so that we could leave and things should be taken care of. But as I was sitting there and enjoying this experience, if you will, not enjoying the fact that there was a difficulty, but enjoying the fact that it was so readily available for us to be able to deal with the situation in a very positive way. And I couldn't help but marvel at what's actually available to us. And I can state this about myself. I'm, in many respects, a very simple man. And what I mean by that is I haven't done a lot of studies in my life. And to be quite honest with you, I feel like that because of my religious connections, I kind of avoided that. I was kind of steered a different direction. Education is not necessary. Skills are secondary. You need to be about serving God and doing His will, as most religion takes us. And as I reflect on this, I realize, whatever skills and abilities that could have been developed much earlier in my life were really prolonged and stunted and hindered to a great degree as far as I'm concerned. And so part of my quest now is to see that that doesn't happen to younger generations. Because in my estimation, and this is where I want to introduce our special guest, I wanted to kind of set the scene, and I want to hopefully have a conversation about this. I am a theist. I don't see that ever changing. I have been all my life. I've heard some really good arguments from a lot of my atheist friends, and I say that with delight. I feel like I have a number of atheist friends, and I'm very thankful for that. I've learned a lot and plan to continue to learn more. They've raised a lot of questions in my mind, but they're questions I believe that have answers. And, I'm enjoying going down this road together, this journey together. But to get very specific, and before I introduce Dr. Jones, I want to make a statement, and I'd like to hear him address this, and that is, I've heard him state this before, and I just want to hear a little elaboration on it, and that is that what Jesus brought to the table when he came has everything to do with what I experienced this morning. Like I said, I couldn't help but just marvel at the fact, and let me go into just a little bit of detail, that there's someone that's qualified, that's able to study a particular physical situation, and any number, I should say, of physical situations, physical ailments, diseases, etc., to the point that they can actually find different elements, put them together, and cure. And if someone told me that I was going to have to do that, I would say, I don't think that's possible. But it is for some. And what a wonderful contribution to humanity, to mankind. And as one who has been steered in a different direction, I have such an appreciation for that sort of thing, because I'm convinced that this is gifting, if you will, that's been given to us, and we should be very thankful. And thankful not just to a God, but to one another, and learn to appreciate one another. And I think that's enough said. I want to go ahead and introduce Dr. Jones. Are you there?
I am very much enjoying.
Hello, Dr. Jones.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Well,
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
Microphone problems.
We do have microphone problems. Can you hear me,
Okay.
Darryl?
I can hear you. Could you hear me?
I could hear you the entire time.
Okay.
If they would give me
Good.
a little bit more volume up here, I would appreciate it. I think it's fascinating. That is the direction that you're going in, and I feel very comfortable with it.
Good. I'd love to hear your what you have to say.
I mean, you're bringing up so many topics. You've talked about various subjects that could be talked about.
Pick one.
Well, when I listen to you, I hear you stating, well, Jesus came along, and I think that we need to go back to when Jesus came along.
Okay.
If you would have heard Jesus speaking, you would have argued for a scientific community. You would have argued for the kind of things that are happening today, simply because of the teaching, namely of Jesus. Unfortunately, religious people, when they hear someone stating what Jesus stated, they have the propensity of mysticizing, spiritualizing, placing a lot of hyperbole in the language, and rendering the words of Christ rather than trying to deal with what he said. And this is a major problem, not just with Christ, but it's it's a major problem in science today. For instance, I talk with scientists all the time from all over the world. It's part of my business. In other words, as not just one who sits on the stage of various shows, I work as a professional in the context of linguistic science, and have for a long period of time, almost 3 decades now. My point is, if Jesus was making an argument to become critically honest with ourselves, not just from the standpoint of dealing with that which is subjective, but also dealing with that which is objective, I don't know why, if the linguistic data is there, if the proof is there that Jesus was doing such a thing, I don't know why people are trying to push Jesus to the side as if he is insignificant. That is in our lives today, because if a person can actually look at the data itself, and I'm talking about, this is an empirical thing. It's something that can be examined. It's not an issue of being subjective. It's not an issue of saying, well, maybe, maybe not. I'm simply saying there is enough data that has been established. There is enough data that we can look at to say that Jesus was pushing us forward. That is, to deal with our subjective experiences and to develop an objective mindset into moving forward. He was not about attempting to save mankind in a theological sense or a spiritual sense. And I think that the religious world would rather distract us from the real Jesus than to deal with the real Jesus. And I think that atheists, for the most part, they've heard religious people talking about Jesus rather than rational people talking about Jesus. Therefore, their conclusions are of a religious nature. In other words, objection. And I can't blame the atheists for rejecting the notions of the religious renderings of Jesus. I don't blame them. I'm just as much an atheist in that camp as any other atheist, because I can't accept the religious notions at all. But my point is, if we look at the evidence of what Jesus was suggesting in various categories, I don't think it's sensible to reject Jesus and to accept science, the science that we have today. That would be a contradiction, very much. And for instance, if you would have been walking with Jesus, you would have heavily invested your life in certain things if you were not as conditioned as his disciples. But his disciples were less prone, in a sense, to follow a theological agenda, and yet they did follow a theological agenda simply because of various reasons. And this is a very difficult conversation to have, in a sense, because we don't have the time to even get started. But hopefully I've made some sense to you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, one of the things, the conversation between my wife and I this morning, one of the places it went had to do with, it seems like, and to even take the words of the Apostle Paul, he talked about a barrier being broken down, the thing that divides us and basically againstness. And, it took an opening of my eyes, in a sense, to look at the world in a completely different viewpoint, and that is to see, as large as the world is, as many people as there is on it, how well we actually do communicate and get along in our day and time, and how much contribution is made from all areas of the world for the betterment of humanity. And at times it seems like the only huge hindrance is religious ideas and notions about a God who is angry and displeased and very disgruntled with most of what he created, and so he's going to wipe it out and give rewards to the ones that are promoting this kind of stuff. And as I'm stating, it seems like that is the greatest hindrance of us moving forward and making greater strides for the betterment of all.
You know, one of the things that we can do today with what Jesus said, we could sit down and legitimately look at it and create a better model, let's say, for the sake of what we do in the context of prisons. Our prison system is failing, miserably so. Mm-hmm. When people walk out of prison, it's like walking out of institutional life into a different world completely. And these men and women are faced with the tragedy of trying to deal with two completely different worlds. And if we would go back and look at what Jesus suggested in many, many different kinds of paradigms, we will find that he did offer methods and practices that would change the dynamic of how we do things, that is, with people who have problems and do wrong. And I think it would be the best step forward. In other words, I'm simply saying that should we learn how to correct the behavior, if possible, of, say, someone who raped or murdered someone? I think so. I think that the Apostle Paul is a good example of one who murdered various times for various reasons, similar to the bombers of 9/11. You can't say that the Apostle Paul wasn't the 9/11 individual. He was. He was the one willing to lay down his life, willing to kill in the name of his religion. And whatever promises were made, he was ready to step up to the plate and meet all of them. So the question would be, and I don't find any other paradigm working as well as we find with Paul. We find radically so that he's killing people one day, and the next day he's writing letters saying love is patient, it's kind, it doesn't keep a record of wrongs. And he goes further and he said, you know, if you find someone doing a wrong, he said you need to find mature people who can gently deal with people who have problems, who have done wrong. And those things are looked at by people who study psychology, etc. And this is a game changer, and not just for a handful of people, but when you look at the people in prison, they are subjugated. Here we are, we have great science, and yet at the same time we're ignoring the works of Christ. I would hate to ignore the works of Darwin just for the sake of being biased. But today we are completely ignoring, in a sense, the works of Christ because we can't get religion out of our goddamn mind, if that makes sense. And my point is, religion is such a superfluous thing. It gets in the way of healthy thinking. In other words, it will stop us from looking at someone who knew more about correcting behavior in a day in which they had no computers, no telephones, no this and that, but just basic people doing fundamental things. And I think that we need to improve our sciences. That is, in trying to deal with the human condition. You know, most of the time we want to talk about, well, you know, we have a new television or a new iPhone, or we have the ability to look at maybe things that we do in hospitals. That's wonderful. But the context of science needs to improved to the extent of wrestling with all of the issues, not just some. It doesn't need to ignore and say, I'm going to be blinded, because, your confession is your religion forced you to become blind concerning education.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm simply saying that, in a sense, there is a movement in the science world that is just as blind to the works of Christ. And it's sad. And I think that serious linguists like Chomsky and others like him, who deal more with mind science, who deal with the genome factor, I think they're more willing to be honest about what Jesus potentially said and deal with the substance rather than just dismissing it and doing a David Silverman thing by saying, oh, this is a myth, he died on the cross, and let's dismiss it and put him next to Santa Claus. I mean, I get the point. I understand that for the most part what David is trying to do, he's a wonderful person. He's trying to dismiss the religious notion. But if he's trying to dismiss the religious notion concerning Christ, why not do it in a legitimate sense and quit trying to bullshit people? And I think that was one of the conversations that I wanted to have with David, and I haven't committed to questioning anyone along the lines that I wanted to question David, because David made a major statement, that is, in his push, and I wanted to challenge that in a serious way. But I'm not going to do so until I have someone like David Silverman back on our show, because that seriously needs to be challenged. Why would you do X, Y, and Z if, in fact, we do have such and such? And I want to provide that such and such on a program like that, because I'm tired of what religion did to you. It forced you to close your eyes. And this, in a sense, is what lots of people are doing to the works of Christ. They're closing their eyes. They're closing their eyes to the works of Paul. I don't think that we need to close our eyes. We don't need to be the ostrich, hiding, pretending that everything will go away.
Well, I think of the term throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And in this case, to make application, I think we would have to say, is there a baby? Is there really a baby there? And if so, can we get to know this baby? That may be not the best way to put it, but I think that that's along the lines of what you're saying. And to quote the words of Paul, I guess some of my favorite words now, because it prefaces what you were talking about earlier about love, being kind and patient and all the things that he states that love is. He prefaces it with, let me show you the most excellent way. And there's something to that I think should invade every one of us, and in the sense of what we have to bring to the table, because all of us do, all of us have something to contribute. And if we know something about this thing called love, the thing that, as you're saying, gets dismissed in a lot of cases, then, take my business, for example. I'm a paint contractor here in a smaller type community, to where you wouldn't think that it would be more work than 9 or 10 men could do. But And we do quality work, but here that's not necessarily enough. And I've already stated, as I stated earlier, the goal in my life is, what would love do? Not just toward my wife, toward my children, but toward everyone that I have dealings with. And that's the approach that I take when I go to someone's house and do work for them. That's first. If we agree on a price, hopefully that part will take place too, so that we can keep going. But this, I can see the sense of what Paul was saying when he said, let me show you the most excellent way. There's a way to do things. There's a way that's not as excellent to do things.
I agree with you, but the way that people render that is, let me show you the most excellent way. Let me show you a supreme being. Let me show you some form of a God. And this is not what Jesus was saying. This is not what Paul was saying. This is not what was being stated. What was being stated is, let's improve the manner in which we look at things. Let's let's look at it from a different viewpoint for a while. Let's move forward instead of backward. And so these people were stuck in esoteric, in a very esoteric mindset, and they created, quote unquote, a meta language that had failed them. It forced the mind to be narrow, and unfortunately, if you create a meta language that forces the mind to be so narrow, as the Jews did, the question would be, why would you want to keep speaking like that? And this is, to me, why it's so important for us to see the transition, that is, from modeling theology with an abjad into what we call a Greek writing system. And so these people were no longer willing to say, well, let's just create some art so we can look at it and keep being ambiguous. Let's get clear. Whatever we think to be true, let's put it down. And people will be able to scrutinize our work. In other words, if you do peer review, it's not true that you're trying to offer up something that's just up for everyone to give their perspective. That is, so we can all put it on the table and brag about what a great time we had at the art museum. Peer review is about people who get extremely critical about what you have written or documented, whether it be through the means of video or other venues of promulgation. And I guess my point is, this is exactly what Jesus was advocating. He was advocating a new day in which things could be verified, a new day in which things would have a system of peer review, etc. And religious people don't talk about that. And so when people reject, quote unquote, theology, most of the time what they do is they simply reject it in a religious sense because they are used to the bullshit side. But, if you get past the bullshit and you start looking at the evidence, that is the textual evidence, and then you start examining what we do have, I don't see why anyone would reject all of it. I think there is something about the text itself that I would like to really brag about at some point. I'm going to say soon, because there is something that took place with certain manuscripts that can't even be duplicated today, and most people are not even aware of it. And we can take lots and lots of computers and try to do the gymnastics, and we just can't duplicate it. Again, there was something that took place 2,000 years ago, and you can see this in various forms, and it can be viewed. It can be looked at. And I think that we have our eyes closed. I don't think we want to see that right now because, when religious people have polluted the text as they have, who really wants to hear someone crying woof and woof and woof over and over again? So you just laugh when you hear someone say that there might be something worth looking at or examining that is within the fines of what we call the manuscripts of, just some of the manuscripts of the Bible.
Yeah. I lost my thought.
Did you fall asleep?
Oh, no, I'm not bored. Actually, I'm enjoying this.
My wife, it's kind of funny. We talk about things all the time, and sometimes we're doing a show. Sometimes we get tired. she will always joke with me. She said, it seems like people would get some of the stuff that you're talking about, because it seems like at least they would be curious, as curious possibly as our cats are. We have several cats. And we have the new one, by the way, that we had in the studio. We tried to save 2 kittens, and I think they were approximately less than a week old. And we were able to save 1, and we were thankful for that. And so we call him Bo Peep because we like the little jingle, the little Bo Peep, come blow your horn, sheep's in the meadow, yada, 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 So it's fun. But he's pocket size, and so we were thinking about calling him Pouchet, but we said no, he'll go beyond the pocket size. But right now he's just pocket size, but he's aggressive. He's a fighter, and he's not a he.
Oh.
But we call all of our female cats, names like Bob. Bob is a wonderful cat. In fact,
Bobcat.
Yeah, a bobcat. Yeah, but the way that we got Bob was interesting. This has a little bit to do with our conversation here. One night we heard this noise, and we have this huge bathtub. It's a corner tub. It's, my wife and I can get into it together, etc. It's made out of fiberglass, and it has this area that's just open. And somehow a possum got in underneath it during the middle of the night, and I didn't feel like working at all. And so what I did, I went over there by the faucet area, and there was a particular ring that you can pick up, and I did pick that particular part up, and I took some Clorox just to give it a smell that maybe it might, just get out of the room or, find its way out. And it did. But the problem with that, I poured so much Clorox into the area that it forced us to get out of the bedroom, because this is in the master bath. And to make a long story short, it just inundated the house, and it was strong. And so...
Know what that's like.
Yeah, I went to the front door. It turned into a lot of work. I opened up the front door and the back door and the windows, and it was terrible. And my wife said, we need to get some sleep. We've been up too long. And we had. And so I shut the front door and the back door and most of the windows, and we left the bedroom windows open and also the bathroom window open. But we had the bedroom window open maybe 5 or 6 inches, something like that. And we have these blinds that are extremely wide, horizontal blinds. And we left them all the way down, and we had them just positioned to where it allowed a nice draft to come in and to try to get rid of the smell. And so we laid down. And the bottom of our bedroom window is some 6+ feet off of the ground. And so to give you an approximation of what we're talking about for what I'm getting ready to tell you. But we laid down, and the window's open about 5 inches. And you can kind of picture this, because we have our bedroom window. We can look out and look at a beautiful tree and some of the things that we like to do. We just like to lay around in the morning sometimes after reading. We normally get up around 5 or 6, start reading. But we like to watch the sun come up, and so it's faced toward the east, etc. But my point is, during that time of opening up that window and laying down, I laid down and I was almost asleep. And then all of a sudden, it was like Superman or Batman came flying through the window, and it was this black cat with a bobtail. And this thing was aggressive and did not just climb in the window, but flew and landed on almost the other side of the bedroom and just rolled, and then jumped up on top of the bed and laid down with me. And I went, wow, that's weird. And subsequent days to come, Bob kept doing the same thing in various ways. Just every time that we would open the door, he would just run in and make it himself at home. And you couldn't help but just love Bob. I mean, he was just, like a guy that would sneak in during the middle of the night and just party. And he felt very much at home, so we started calling him Bob. And so we have Bob the cat, and now we have Bo Peep, and then we have another cat that we picked up the other day. But I'm simply sharing with you cat tales because I forgot where we were, and that's why it's meaningful to this conversation, so I apologize.
Oh, that's fine. It's probably a good way to close out the show. I think we're just about out of time. But, I did have one more thought I'd like to share. The only, if I look seriously at what I can see, what we have in English and what is fairly evident about the life of Jesus and what we've already talked about, the writings of the Apostle Paul and certain statements Jesus made about loving your enemies and etc. The only argument that I could think of that could possibly hold any water against it would be, well, if a person chose to live that way, they would be taken advantage of, they would be abused. And of course, I think that was quite evident in Jesus's case. But I guess, my response to that would be, well, what's it worth? What is really valuable in our lives in the first place? And I know that I'm talking to a man that understands what I'm talking about. I mean, I know the kind of relationship that you have with your wife. I have that kind of relationship with my wife and with our children and et cetera. And to be quite honest, I know of nothing better in this life. And so I guess what really motivates us more than anything is, we want to see all people enjoy such. And I think if we do, we will be more than willing to share that which we have that will benefit our fellow man. So I think, in my estimation, we're barking up the right tree, seeing people come together and have wonderful discussions and relating to one another. I know of nothing better.
I agree. I think that if we can put all things on the table, look at all of them, it becomes a very complex table. Mm-hmm. And but what it does, it provides something to our children and our grandchildren. It's the fact that we have put it on the table, the fact that we were willing to say, listen, we know some things, but we don't know everything.
Absolutely.
And I think that one of the things that I love about the works of Christ, he doesn't pretend to know everything. He doesn't pretend to be, quote unquote, the God Almighty or the all-powerful one who can do everything, fly through the sky. But he does say, let me nuance some things. You can go past where you are, your current circumstances. And he nuances it well in many different ways. And it's true that some people, they did take it and make it into hyperbole, which is unfortunate. But they were, in a sense, attempting to say, this was a wonderful person. And I would hate to think that since a particular culture, and this is a very sensitive issue to me, I think it's a very prejudiced mindset to speak against Christ. It's almost like being a bigot in a sense, because he wasn't living around people who did not have extreme cultural bias. They did. He was around people who they were not capable in many different areas. And so when they did start bragging for the first time in their lives about a human being like they did, I mean, these people were they were not. I mean, they were leaving, in a sense, the ancient concept of worship for actually accepting a human being. And that was radically different. However, they had the propensity of including in that hyperbole. The same thing is true when you look at slavery, how unfortunate slavery is. But when you find people who have been enslaved and they find a sense of, say, a song, and they find metaphor, or they find strength in metaphor, they find strength in memorizing various things and moving forward with various styles of singing and keeping things in a particular context. We don't put those people down. What we do is we find out what blessed them in the midst of such struggle and tragedy. What we do is we try to understand them. And I think that's the appropriate thing to do. And the same thing can be stated concerning the days in which Jesus lived. He said, you're just like slaves. You're in bondage. And he came not to set us free spiritually. He didn't come to set us free so we could go to heaven. That's not the idea of the works of Christ.
Right.
The works of Christ are very, very simple in a sense, and yet complex. He simply was speaking to some people who were so beat down and driven, pushed, shoved, and he gave them room enough to breathe. And so we're out of time, and so I beg for forgiveness.
Well, you
you,
have
Darryl.
it from me. I don't know about the folks in the studio there, but
Yeah.
you have my forgiveness. And so-
Yeah, Joey's going to give me a hard time. He is. But
Well, let me help him out. I'll close this thing out and invite everyone to watch the wonderful show that's coming up next called Clash Course, where Joey Livingston and Greg Bray do a marvelous job. And so I want to ask everyone to stay tuned for that. And also Inspiring Honesty with Greg Bray and The Unconventional Pastor with Bob Graves. And then to top it all off, we have The Cult of Honesty with yourself, Dr. Jones. And I'm not sure who will be on tonight, but I'll be looking forward to it.
well, thank you. My wife's going to be there like she always is. And one of the things that I want to really nuance is what women are doing, instrumentally so in all of our lives. They have the freedom to really push the spectrum of thought. So we'll see you then. Take care.
All right. We've enjoyed it.
Same here.
All right.